Welcome to the Chant Hannah Show, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're enjoying a beautiful sunny day where you are. It is nice here wherever we are here. So today on the show, we have the highly respected retired police officer, Lieutenant Tim McMillan, on the show. And I will let Chant do the honors of introducing our guest today. So this is Michael W. Hall saying, Chant, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Michael. It's such a pleasure to have you as my co-host today. It's a real honor to be with you today, Michael. Thank you so much. We do have a special show. He grew up in Savannah, Georgia. He's a retired law enforcement professional, civil rights advocate, writer, public speaker, consultant, and a proud father. He holds a BA degree in psychology and also mathematics with a focus on cognitive psychology, perception, and consciousness. He has worked and devoted his entire life to being a public advocate for civil rights, equality, and positively engaging in the human experience. I am deeply honored and privileged to welcome Tim McMillan to my show. Welcome, Tim.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much, guys. It's a pleasure to be here and speak with both you, Michael, and Chant.
Thank you. Tim, recently you published an astounding report on the FBI raid regarding Bob Lazar and his place of business. And you posted that last week. Can you bring us up to date regarding that and just expound upon it a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. No, last week I posted a local FOIA request I had filed with the Landsberg Police Department, which is where the area where Bob Lazar's business, United Nuclear Scientific, is located. Really, the focus of it was to examine something that was shown in the recent documentary, Bob Lazar, Area 51 and UFOs by Jeremy Corbell. And really the basis of it was, I know Jeremy had received a lot of flack from people who were accusing him of having fabricated that entire event or made it up, or maybe even embellished it as being a significant raid that involved dozens of FBI agents. And ultimately, through the local FOIA process, which works very quickly, especially in comparison to the federal process, I was able to confirm that indeed the FBI search of Bob Lazar's business did occur. It did occur when, as it was said to have occurred in Jeremy's film, and it was indeed a very large-scale coordinated operation, just as Jeremy had indicated in his film. Now, the report, I think anybody would be probably a little overly optimistic to have thought that you were going to see in any official documents anything related to the more grandiose claims by Mr. Lazar. And so it didn't give us any clarity of whether they were searching for element 115 that is kind of implied in the film, or anything that would confirm the things that Mr. Lazar said, having worked at a secret facility on reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. So we didn't get any clarity there, but we can at least walk away and say that this is indeed true. And I have spoken to Jeremy Corbell since then several times, and nothing else. I think there's some gratification on their end, because this is an official legal document that does verify Bob Lazar has told the truth about that raid and everything else. And like many of his claims, that's hard to substantiate. But I can say, yes, that happened.
Well, and Tim, let me jump right in here a second. You were mentioning also that the local law enforcement really went out of their way to fill out a quite detailed report on this matter, which you thought was kind of significant.
I did. I really did. I mean, these are very common reports, colloquially called agency assist reports amongst the profession. And typically they're very, 3 sentences. We were asked to help, we went and helped, and we left. But this covered about 3 days, 2 days prior to the search, and then the day of the search. It detailed a lot of interesting details it notes that Mr. Lazar was under FBI surveillance at least the day of the search, leaving his residence and arriving at his place of business, which is interesting. I think that kind of the whole crux of it that I walked away with, because there were so many details in it, is that the FBI was not treating Mr. Lazar like a benign material witness that you just wanted to come get some sales receipts from. They were treating him like a suspect, and the heart of what they was listed is in the report as being investigated related to a homicide investigation at upper northern Michigan. And so it was pretty illuminating, and typically you wouldn't see that many details. I always caveat that when I mention that to people, because it's easy to run away with that and say, oh, what does that mean? Well, Landsberg, Michigan has a population of 1,200 people and has a small police department, and likely time affords one to be a little more detailed in a report that I may, in my past experience, consider mundane, or there's just speculation on my part. Potentially the reporting officer was familiar with Bob Lazar in the story and realized that maybe someday somebody, almost 2 years later, would come knocking, and they wanted to make sure they documented as many details as they knew in the report. So it was interesting, but it was illuminating. It did provide us a lot more. It was more than I expected. I will say that much.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for having gone over that in such great depth, Tim. Just before coming on the show, you published more never-before-seen police reports related to a rash of cattle mutilations in North Georgia. Can you give us an overview of these reports? By the way, I just want to let our listeners know, 27 pages of incident and investigative reports from the Hall County Sheriff's Office detail one cattle rancher's year-long battle with a mysterious predator that killed and mutilated over 20 beef cows on his 200-plus acre North Georgia farm in 2009 to 2010.
Yeah, sure. No, and I did. I just posted that. It is available on my website through my blog, coyotes, plural, tail.com. I just posted that about an hour and a half ago. So that's fresh off the presses. And this is another incident where I was curious of what intriguing materials might be out there in the local government world in relation to FOIA requests. So I filed a FOIA request with the Hall County Sheriff's Department, which is not too terribly far from where I am here on Savannah, and received, like you said, 27 pages related to a rash of cattle mutilations that occurred on one property in Hall County from the fall of 2009 until assumedly the fall of 2010. The reports themselves are the Hall County Sheriff's Department invested some time investigating. However, they kind of, there's a lot of little details in there. And again, the nice part about these kind of reports these are official law enforcement documents in which the person stating this, unlike maybe other kind of reporting centers, if they're lying, if they're making something up, that is a crime. If the officers themselves are providing false information in those reports, that is a crime. So there should be considered very credible documents. And it does detail that this one poor rancher and his family over this almost year's time span ended up losing about 20 beef cattle in just the same mysterious manner. I'll be honest with you, over here on the southeast coast especially, cattle mutilations I think are much more of a prevalent thing out west, southwest of America is where they're most commonly considered. I mean, the Northwest as well, but we really don't hear about that much here. It was surprising to see them happening with such frequency, and we don't know exactly the time span, but of how frequent they were over that entire length of almost a year. But there was one point that is documented in the reports where in May of 2010, the cattle rancher actually found 7 cows, all on the property. All of them appeared to have been drained of blood. They had been mutilated to varying degrees with different organs taken out, genitals removed, udders removed. I mean, it was very consistent with what, if there's such thing as a conventional cattle mutilation, everything was very consistent with that, including the fact that it ended up ultimately still to this day is just kind of a mystery. No one was ever charged with that crime. It was never determined who was committing this. And most importantly, I think that's something I covered in my blog of why cattle mutilations are such a sparsely filled niche when it comes to paranormal enthusiasts is why. Who and why are kind of mutually inclusive with each other because of the acts that are being committed. Why? Why would someone want to do this? Cut out cattle genitals with surgical precision and leave these carcasses out there in the field? Still a mystery. I will say that I think it's one of the more disturbing mysteries. I will not profess to be a cattle mutilation expert, nor it has ever been a focus of the things that I have examined. However, I will say that it is one of the aspects that, unlike a lot of the other topics, whether it's UFOs, cryptids, any other anomalous ideas that are phenomena that's out there, there's no denying these are real. You have a dead cattle's carcass right there in front of you. And I think it's you kind of dabble into it and look at. I consider myself an objectively open-minded person who likes to investigate these things. Meaning, I am always willing to. I always try to rule out the prosaic first, and all prosaic attempts to answer this type of phenomenon, whether we're talking about these Hall County reports or over the last 50 years, possibly longer. There's no one that has ever been able to give an exact explanation for what's going on in totality. You might be able to explain, well, this is probably from natural predation. This could be from this, but you can't seem to answer all of the questions in one fell swoop.
And how can you actually answer the questions? Let me give my listeners an example, and that is Skinwalker Ranch. There is a case where the rancher who eventually got bought out by Bigelow, and thank goodness for that, because he had lost so much money from cattle mutilations on his ranch, and his family was in economic. Basically, it had ruined their income, and they were ruined, generally speaking. Very upset regarding their own cattle being mutilated right in front of them. An example of that was the rancher actually was looking at a calf. He turned his head, he looked again, and it was mutilated within a matter of seconds. So how do you investigate something like that? It was basically bordering on the paranormal at that point. Another thing I wanted to point out to our listeners is in New Mexico, United States, that is the only state that has its own sheriff's posse dedicated to the topic of animal mutilation, just because that happened for so long, for so many decades. And we all know that the wonderful and dedicated Linda Moulton Howe, actually a researcher, she dedicated her entire life to that topic to try and figure out something that really is not that figure outable. In fact, the phenomenon of animal mutilation has been stereotyped as, and you're going to laugh when I say this, Tim, mass hysteria, which is a terrible term to use. It's such a stupid term. And also has been called things like, it has been labeled connected to satanic cults. I want to touch on that for a moment in a second, but that is these kinds of situations that occur, they're not just Fortean, and we can't dismiss it as that. These are situations that really happen to real people, and they have spent all of their money for these animals to be able to have the normal kind of business that has happened for generations in their family, only to have it interrupted by these strange, seemingly enigmatic and nefarious forces out there that are causing them to have to shut down their ranches. Regarding mass hysteria, I'd like you to touch on that terrible term. But before we touch on that, satanic cults, I also want to mention to you, I really don't believe satanic cults are involved in many of these cases. It cannot just be dismissed, the topic of animal mutilations regarding that. Reason why, when people are involved, it's very, it's not that difficult to look for evidence regarding human-based crimes. When it has to do with something that's unknown, that's different.
I absolutely agree with you, Chant. And well, first and foremost, I can't stress enough to anybody who's listening that when it comes to the cattle mutilation thing, what compels me the most to even have looked into these reports, or just in general to look at them potentially in the future, is I think people disregard the fact here that you mentioned it. There are real people here who are victims of a crime, and it is their livelihood. And they're losing these. During my research of just these Hall County reports, going past the reports, I looked into some of eventually the family, when they had just kind of exhausted any and every attempt at trying to figure out what was going on, that they turned to the news media, potentially a smart move because they stopped there. That could be a clue. But in listening to the interviews by this family, I could feel their frustration, pain. I mean, this is their livelihood, and something or someone is taking it away. So whatever it is, whether it's people or something else, it's doing so with absolutely no regard for the kind of the moral consequences of what they're doing, of taking people's livelihoods away. You mentioned Skinwalker, people who are being put out of business. So it's very unfortunate, and that's one of these things before people are quick to dismiss it. If it is some sort of natural prosaic causes, then that is something that the natural sciences need to figure out so that they can try to protect these people who are in the cattle industry. In regards to some of the skeptical dismissal of things, you mentioned mass hysteria. My background, I have kind of quietly been involved in the study of UFOs or anomalous phenomena for the last 10 years. Very, very quietly, I should say. I lurked in the shadows. But cognitive psychology and consciousness and perception has really been the focus of my research and academic background. And you have heard the topic of mass hallucination. Mass hysteria is a real thing where people can exhibit symptoms based on it's kind of the placebo effect of believing that they will experience the symptoms. But mass hallucinations, which are often attributed to mass UFO sightings, that's just ridiculous. There's absolutely zero scientific evidence that supports mass hallucinations are a real thing. I mean, anyone is welcome to look that up on their own. There's no empirical evidence that says that's true. And in fact, if you really think of that logically, the idea that mass groups of people would get together and somehow be able to see a material object that is not in their environment real collectively, well, that's just as fascinating as the idea of any other idea you could come up with, whether it's the extraterrestrial visitors or anything, because the ability for people to mass produce something into their environment that's not real, that's incredible, but it's also not proven. And so there's this very easy catch-all. It sounds good. Sounds really good. Sounds scientific, but there's zero scientific evidence that mass hallucinations are real.
I'm glad you mentioned that. And there's mass hysteria, which is a legitimate term, but it's not usable. It's not something that I would label with regards to animal mutilations, which I've heard of before. Also, they're not hallucinating that their cattle has been mutilated. We all know that because there's too many reports to prove that the incident did occur, and too many witnesses that saw the results thereafter, whatever the explained event that occurred that caused the situation. The other thing I wanted to mention is something you mentioned, and that is we're right back where it started, aren't we? We see that the animal mutilation occurred, but we actually went in a circular discussion in our heads, and also with the people around us regarding the investigations and just the topic, discussing it. We still cannot figure out, although there's been many multi-state investigations regarding animal mutilations, and some of these cases continually redacted in secrecy regarding the reports of them, we still don't know what occurred.
Yeah. And that is, if anyone is ever curious, that is why my website, which has other stuff, and we'll be having other stuff coming up. I have copies of those FOIA requests. I have some information on current projects I'm working on and the blog that we've mentioned. But that is why it's called Chasing the Coyote's Tail. because I have, after being involved in this for a number of years, I have come to, instead of labeling any one type of phenomena as UFO or a cryptid or paranormal, but kind of blanketing it under this coyote being the very famous Native American legends of the coyote trickster myth. So really a tip of the hat to people like Jacques Vallée and those who looked at this the same way, that this phenomena, whatever it is, it all seems to share in the same traits. In fact, it's the most consistent traits that it acts like a trickster. It disobeys and just rejects all conventional norms and our pragmatic understanding of reality. And so I think that's one thing that you can't dismiss. You can try to pull it into some more pragmatic areas to try to understand it. But it seems to enjoy. I'm not familiar intimately. I'm aware of the Skinwalker Ranch. I'm aware of some of the cattle mutilations that came there. I'm not familiar with that specific instance you mentioned, where one basically happened almost before someone's eyes. But I mean, there you go. That rejects every conventional ideas and understandings we have of how reality.
Yes, and I'm glad you said that. By the way, I did want to say publicly that I did actually speak to somebody who worked at Skinwalker Ranch, and they did confirm what I said. So I was able to actually confirm that. And also, if people want to look this up, all they have to do is Google Coast to Coast, and they will find there was a wonderful report regarding that incident that George Knapp covered regarding his investigation into Skinwalker Ranch. Moving on, and also I did want to make one comment about the trickster, that wonderful motif that you're using for your website. That's a great example of a Jungian archetype. And that basically is supernatural to a point, the way you describe it, but it's still extremely relevant. I wanted to go into how you probe out local FOIA requests, Tim, and how they seem to be an untapped resource for ufology. Can you go into that, please?
Sure, I would love to. And in fact, that is something that I haven't had really a chance to share with anybody. So anybody who's interested in doing this type of thing, here's the process. And if you need any help, by all means, please reach out to me through the website. But typically what I will do, and this is, people don't realize that at the local level, all states have some type of freedom of information laws. They're all different per state, but there is all something. And some of them I've assisted my good buddy John Greenwald recently, who runs the Black Vault, and he started founding some local ones in California. We had to kind of learn California law, especially when it comes to getting police reports, because they're a little tricky, but that's okay if you're willing to put forth that effort. And again, that's when I'll be glad to help anybody. But presently, my full-time job right now is retired from policing. I'm a civil rights investigator. I have no more or less power than the general public. And so I use these FOIA requests in my job frequently. And at the local level, unlike the federal level, your returns come in minutes or hours as opposed to days or, at the federal level, it's often months. Again, going to my buddy John Greenwald, his running record is 14 years for a response. You will get them very quickly. And so because of the expediency of it, just kind of to demonstrate, I just demonstrated for someone the other day how you can go about it, is if you've got access to something like MUFON sighting database or even NICAP, any one of these reporting forums, and you see a sighting report that looks interesting, and you think, that's enough interesting there that maybe somebody else saw it. Or more importantly, maybe somebody reported it to local law enforcement, which I will let everybody know, coming from 16 years of being a police officer, yes, indeed, they were infrequent, but we did receive reports of UFOs. We received reports of Savannah is one of the most haunted cities, allegedly, in the country, and so we get ghost reports. We get all of this stuff. And so these reports exist out there. They're just little hidden gems waiting to be mined, and it's how you go about it. And oftentimes the process that I will go about it is if I see a sighting report or a story, maybe even in the news, it sounds interesting, I'll just submit a Freedom of Information request to whatever agency or jurisdiction this has happened in. Nowadays, it's very, very easy. A lot of places just have these online portals where you just say, hey, I'm looking for this. And within a day or two, the Bob Lazar report took me 3 hours to get, 3 business hours, 100% true, 3 hours. And so you submit these requests. What I typically will do is I will ask for copies of the 911 log for that specific time where that sighting or something has taken place. With that 911 log, you're going to be given all the 911 calls that came in during that hour or whatever time frame. Now, 9 times out of 10, you come up empty, kind of like fishing. You cast it out there, and 9 times out of 10, you come up empty. But what you're looking for is that one log entry where someone has called 911 to report something weird. And in that log, you will get the case number, you'll get the officer's response, you'll be able to find out whether that officer wrote a report or not. And then depending on how each state is, I'll take that as a springboard where, in Georgia, we have great, it's called the Georgia Open Records Act, where if I have a 911 call where I realize someone has called in something strange, they've called in a UFO sighting, what I'll do is ask for that report and any body camera or dash camera footage of the officers who responded. So even if the officers didn't write a report, I don't think people realize how invaluable this information is, because you potentially have a person who could be describing their event in the most recent manner that you could possibly hope for, on video, on audio, getting these details. Of course, can't expect a police officer to be a trained UFO investigator, so they may miss some things, but you're still going to get the most recent information, the most recent witness information that's out there, captured on audio and video, and that's phenomenal. And there's so many little details that maybe can help you go from there. Like I said, I think it's a very big untapped resource that a lot of people don't realize it's out there. And I understand. And I mean, it happens to be a component of what I do. And I'm encouraging that for people to explore those avenues because it's not nearly as difficult a process as people think. And quite often, more often than not, the records personnel that I deal with, they're very, very helpful. They're very, very willing to help you. If you don't understand something, you call them, they'll talk to you. And frankly, in some instances, Hall County is a great example. Once they found out what I was looking for, the person who was in charge of finding those records, said, wow, that's really interesting. And let me go see what all I can find. So they actually will help you find this stuff at the local level. And they think it's interesting. And again, whatever you get from these requests, these are official statements. Even if they didn't write a report, but you have, say, a body camera footage where somebody is saying what they saw, they're saying that if they were lying, that if they are not telling the truth about what they're saying, that is a crime. So the likelihood that you're going to get somebody who doesn't at least truly believe they have seen something anomalous is very, very low, because it's a crime. And so it really cuts through a lot of the chase in terms of being able to rule out the hoaxsters or people just looking for a lower claim. Because in most of these cases, these are individuals who may not report them to more of the national reporting centers. They report them to the police. As a cop, I can tell you, we were called from everything to my electricity's gone out, my cable's gone out, my cat's stuck in a tree. I mean, that's part of the job. I know that a lot of things get glorified in other areas, but you really are the last line of defense when no one knows who else to call. And I also encourage agencies in that same regard to bear in mind, no matter what somebody maybe thinks they've seen or not, doesn't mean nobody's crazy here, doesn't mean they're making it up. And frankly, from a national security standpoint, we should encourage people to make these reports. I mean, how do we know it may not be something that is extraterrestrial or incorporeal, but how do we know we're not looking at a foreign antagonist and their exotic technology? These are things we need to know as American citizens. We want to assist in our own safety and security. So,
Chant, I have
a lot of little hidden gems out there.
I have a little question for Tim, if I can, to follow up on that, because Tim, I believe you are opening up a whole area of research for many of the young guns out there, like Dave Beatty and Chant Hannah and those folks, actually getting more material that's probably not been put in a police report when you're talking dash cam and body cam footage. If those folks are out there getting this material and they actually get a copy of something from a city in that regard, are they able to use that, in your opinion, on their websites, on their reports themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do. If you go to my website, I publish all of the FOIA requests that I get. Now, I tell people, I usually put an author's note in everything I publish that says that I personally, and this would be my recommendation to others, I take it upon myself to add extra redactions more than what is given to me. Unlike the federal level, names of witnesses, complainant, officers' names are not redacted. I do redact that information. Although I have the original copies, before I publish anything publicly, I do redact it because I think that to be level-headed and respectful to everyone here. We all know there's a lot of conspiracy. There's a lot of potential for people receiving undue stress. And so taking that extra care to redact those names both benefits those people who maybe genuinely have experienced something strange. Oftentimes the person who's witnessed a UFO sighting has not thought about the subject before, and they weren't expecting it to happen. And so you don't want their experience of reporting it to be a negative experience. And same goes for the law enforcement officers. And that helps encourage both people making reports and officers and agencies being very forthcoming. There could be officers listening to this show right now who, encouraged reach out to me and say, hey, man, you might want to send a FOIA request for this date and time here because I was working and we responded there. Great. But we're not going to get that if we don't protect that. But you absolutely can publish that. I publish them. This is free and open information. I do publish them on my website. I am acting I have no more authority and power now. I am a private citizen, just like everybody else.
Also, I want to point out something a lot of our listeners already know, some don't, and that is FOIA requests, once they are received and published online, the person who requested them is merely doing something that is not only legitimate and fine to do as a private citizen, they're also helping to bring to light something that might not otherwise have been seen. And so that helps us in many ways. One, it helps to provide information about something we may not have known beforehand, or we did. It also helps to provide statistical data, so that we can add that to a database of information we're trying to obtain more data on and create more models out of. And then also I want to give a little history on FOIA requests, and that is, the FOIA request history is, it was signed into law in 1966 by President Lyndon B. Johnson, and FOIA provides the public a right of access to records that exist and can be located in the files of 100 federal departments and agencies. And the other thing I want to mention is that it looks like Department of Homeland Security gets the most, then Department of Defense, Department of Health and Human Services, on down to the Department of Labor. The other thing I want to mention is David, I can never say his last name correctly. Maybe somebody wants to correct me when I say it, but David Pilates, I believe is his name. He wrote a lot of information regarding people who have disappeared in national parks. He's, for over a decade, or almost a decade actually, he's explained how one frustrating FOIA issue he had was the Department of Interior demanded $1.4 million for a list of missing people from their park. Now, sometimes you might run into an issue where the government actually wants you to pay money to get a FOIA request. But I think it's important, no matter what seeming setbacks there could be, always just apply for them. Just always try and get those FOIA requests, no matter what.
Yeah, and in the article, Chant, that I just published today on the FOIA request for the cattle mutilation, I didn't do it with the Bob Lazar, though I can if anybody had any questions about it, but I actually included everything in that one in terms of there's a copy of the letter that I submitted to Hall County, their response and everything. So you'll see my letter of what I sent, and that pertains just to Georgia. However, anyone's welcome to copy the language of what I did. Again, I redacted the names or the location that I was looking for because I didn't want to share that particular information. But I do have all that information. I mean, you are returned back, given the names and addresses for the people who've made these reports. I can't stress enough that I caution people to be very respectful of that information. But if you think that you have something good and you think you have somebody who, like in this case of Hall County, they were unable to get really any answers through law enforcement. And so you do have that potential if you're somebody who's very serious into this study, to respectfully reach out to these people and say, hey, this is something I have some experience in or researching and I'm trying to solve as well. Can I talk to you? In the Hall County case, I did. Now, obviously, we're talking about 9 years have passed. I didn't hear back from them, but I didn't push it. I really didn't because I do respect the fact that, these grim discoveries on their property 9 years ago that I think total affected, which I believe is a low estimate, around $10,000 worth of their livelihood. If they haven't had it happen since, they probably don't want to relive it. And so I can respect that. I'm not going to go knocking on their door.
Well, I agree with you. I think that you're an advocate for transparency, but there's also a point where you're invading people's lives. When I say you, I don't mean you. I mean folks who are into FOIA requests. And so I'm really glad that you brought that up because it's important for people to understand, too. Please educate yourself. Even if you feel you already have this kind of capability, educate yourself on what an ethical responsibility a person has. It's a burden, but it's a good one. To have the kind of ethical responsibility, moral responsibility of knowing that what you're about to publish may actually give a little bit too much information about a person. And is it really worth it? Is it worth the public knowing that extra bit of information? Maybe not. So just remember, when she puts something online, it's basically forever, as they say. And so I'm glad that you have the wherewithal and the capability, Tim, to know when to draw that line. I wanted to also, before you touch on that, wanted to mention that you're something regarding correlational studies. That was the next topic I wanted to bring up. But did you want to go ahead and touch on what I just said?
Well, yeah, I can go right into it because it all flows in, if you don't mind.
Right.
One thing I will mention now, to everybody out there listening is in terms of what my goals are with my website and everything, it has not been fully finished yet, but it will be within the next week or so, is what you just mentioned. And as I'm about to talk about the kind of correlational studies I've been involved in, is part of my website, Chasing the Coyote's Tail. I'm going to try to establish a meeting place. First of all, it's to some part embracing the tricksterness of the whole thing, but have a meeting place for what I call foxes, which are people who are seriously interested in it, maybe want to do the FOIA request, maybe want to do research in a whole different area where there's a secure, login type stuff where we have a message board where people can get help. We can discuss these issues like, hey, I want to look into this. How do I go about it? Or if you get a FOIA request and are curious, should I redact this? Or here's what I got. What's my advice? Basically a meeting place for Michael said, the young guns, the new young guns to the field, like Dave Beatty, just a great guy. I'm very honored to call my friend. People like him and people like everybody here, and also kind of a place where I hid in the shadows for 10 years, but maybe people don't have to feel that way. So I won't get too much into it because it's not up yet. But
right. I'm glad you mentioned Dave Beatty. He's an award-winning filmmaker, and he's just a really good person. I'm actually young gun. He and I were actually labeled as such by a wonderful person named Grant Cameron, and who Michael Hall knows very well, extremely close friend of Michael's. And Young Gun basically is an individual such as myself who seeks out to try and find out as much truth, so to speak, which is a term that I use very loosely, regarding finding out as much about the topic of ufology and other phenomena as possible. And what does truth mean? Well, we could get very philosophical about that, but basically just trying to find as much evidence and any proof regarding the topics we love to cover. Tim, I wanted to go into what other programs you're working on, which leads into the correlational studies of sighting reports, and then you're trying to establish a mathematical framework of UFOs. And wanted to know, why is that so important, and what could come from that?
Sure. Yes, a project that I have been involved in, and again, you can see it on the website, and actually I would love to have help with anybody out there, is establishing a mathematical framework for the UFO phenomenon. That is something, in my opinion, that has been lacking for some time. And specifically what I'm talking about is using machine learning and data science techniques to extrapolate details, variables from sighting reports. And the object is, unlike I think a lot of the statistical analysis I've seen, which are great, from a mathematics perspective, we call descriptive data, which is times of sightings, locations of sightings. That's great, but it doesn't tell us what we're seeing. And so it doesn't really matter if you know where's the best place and time to see something you don't know what you're seeing. Whereas what I'm trying to do is something very similar to, if anyone's familiar with the Battelle study back in the early 50s, which is the only correlational study that I'm aware of where you take actual variables. It can be very intricate, and thanks to modern technology, you can get really, really detailed, such as shape of objects being seen, lights, colors, number of lights, length of sighting. You can add longitude, latitude, a whole host of variables that you extrapolate from these reports. And you're looking for patterns of correlation, dependent and independent variables. And what that ultimately does is give you some kind of mathematical understanding to the problem. Now that is something that, not knocking anybody, because there's so many great people who've been involved in this field for years and years and years. But I do believe that is something that is lacking significantly, because until you are able to establish that mathematical framework, you're really going to have a difficult time ever being able to interject it into any of the hard sciences, quote unquote. And so by getting some mathematical framework to it, it becomes a real phenomenon, no longer just subjective by citing reports. Rather, I can mathematically define it. And once you can mathematically define it, it allows you to expand upon what you could be looking at, what you should be looking for, and also it allows you to establish logarithms for seeking it out. One of the best examples that we just saw last week was the first ever photograph of the black hole. For anybody that saw that, that was not a photograph, quote unquote, that most people are familiar with. You take with your cell phone or an actual camera, unless you're a professional photographer. All the young kids are like, what? No, just my cell phone, huh? But yeah, they do make things that are just designed to take pictures. And that is not a photograph like that. That is actually a visual representation of a significant amount of data points in a logarithm that produces a visual representation of what we're looking at. So it allows you to see an object that literally cannot be seen by the naked eye. And it's such a great distance. Well, those things are potentially possible as it comes to UAP phenomena. But the first thing we have to be able to establish is look for those correlating data points, look for that mathematical framework and quality that goes behind it, and establish that. So right now it is a significant. I'm one of those. The more, when it comes to data studies, the more the merrier. So as much as you can possibly gather, you're going to get a much better picture of what you're looking at, and that'll lead you going forward. I think that I am trying to get ahead of the curve, I guess you could say, and have been for a couple of years in this effort, because one area that I'm extremely intrigued about utilizing this in is the emergence of AI. AI, I believe, we can utilize to assist in understanding this phenomena once we have some data to give AI to say, look for this. And because AI inherently is a non-material object that exists through a material artificial technology. And I believe, by looking at this kind of stuff, AI, I know it's very easy. I hear more often than not about how AI is going to take over the world and kill everybody, and it's going to be the Terminator.
Right? Yeah.
But I tell people that's a human interpretation of how we solve problems, and so that's not necessarily true. And I do try to integrate the technological advances that we see in society as not being as scary. My goal is to try to influence this for a positive thing and remind people that we could be on the cusp of the greatest next advancement in humanity's history, next to the invention of language, which is a technology, and written language, which is a technology. And so that's really the basis of what we're doing now. It's a slow standing process. And I hope to reach out to some other people in the data manipulation, data science, data mining, and machine learning fields that will help out. They're out there. There was a great study, I believe the University of Arizona, I may be saying that wrong. We're an actual professor. That was what he assigned his students, with machine learning on UFO data reports. So it's there. But we once we get that mathematical framework, I think we could really see some exciting things emerge.
Well, AI has some advantages and disadvantages. I think it seems like a myth to me that, but maybe not. There's a lot of credibility, maybe, to what people are saying about AI to the degree they are. However, I think their paranoid flags are going up a little bit too early. I think if it was year 4,000, and then we might have to worry about something like that regarding artificial intelligence killing us. I think humans kill humans, right? So regarding the worry about that, that fear should be much more well-founded regarding humans, worrying about humans being killed rather than AI killing humans. But the problem with humans is that they have a high error rate with everything. And their precision, accuracy, and speed is nothing compared to artificial intelligence. And so the ability to use artificial intelligence for computer science or data like we're talking about is really appealing. I wanted to mention something about what you're talking with regards to data, and that is the statistical analysis that Cheryl Costa does in gathering data, UFO data. One example is the UFO Sightings Desk Reference book that she wrote that covers years 2001 through 2015. That's one other person other than yourself. There might be a few select other people, such as her wife, Linda, who also cover the topic of statistics regarding ufology. Also wanted to go into the deeper insight into the data of what you're talking about, the mathematical framework that you're using. That is, even though you're covering really dry information that some people would fall asleep over. One thing I'd like to mention is, because you have the ability to dedicate yourself to such dry information, in your mind, when you're looking at it, it might look like a beautiful kaleidoscope of information in front of you that's not dry or boring at all. By the time you're done, when you interpret the data and you display it for everybody to look at regarding your hard work and your research, it helps everybody. and it actually helps to flesh out the numbers you've come across and built into the document that you're sharing with everybody. How do you feel about that?
Well, absolutely. I apologize to whoever it is out there because I cannot quote your name specifically, and I'm sorry. But recently, in one of the online groups related to the topic, I saw somebody post a comment about the biggest problem that's going on with the UFO community is nobody likes to do, quote, the boring work. And maybe we need to start the boring UFO network. And I mean, they nailed it. And I really thought it was a good post because that's absolutely accurate. And you're right. Not everybody thinks that that's boring. And I have a weird mixed academic background from both mathematics, which is, such a definitive science, to psychology, who, always I would muse, the real thing is science is kind of like UFOs in the sense that everything that we think we know about psychology will change in the next 10 years. And the only thing we really know for sure is we know nothing. We don't really understand the human mind. Yeah. But the boring work brings it into that stuff that, that's where, Pythagorean theorem is the same today as it was when they built the pyramid. And so that is that real, there's a reason that they say mathematics is the language of God, and that you can define everything in the known universe mathematically. And those are the sciences that the physicists, that the astronomers, that the real scientists rely on, is that mathematics. So I understand that it's boring, but I hope to encourage others like myself who are both open-mindedly curious, willing to be objectively skeptical, but are excited about these things. Because you're right. I mean, if you looked at a linear regression model of this type of stuff, when you're measuring what are the dependent variables to an independent variable, like what determines a type of sighting or what type of object, and you can show through statistical significant data that these things are influences of it. Ooh, that's a component of it. Now I know. 5 light, blue light means this. This temperature aversion means this. And that gives you some stuff to go off of, to have the fun stuff. So very much, I think that it is, and maybe it goes to what Michael's saying about the young guns of ufology, sitting back for many years, just kind of watching. It's encouraging to see. To me, whatever a young gun of ufology, if there is such a definition, is kind of the new wave of people who are bowling over maybe some of the established paths and wanting to pave their own, and aren't content on just doing what's been going on before. And they're blazing trails, and thanks to modern technology, through social media, through the ability to create your own website, have your own podcast, get information out there, they can have voices heard. And there's some really, really incredible people who have emerged that are doing great stuff. And that's very encouraging, very, very encouraging.
Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it very much.
And speaking of great people to come out of the woodwork, Tim, you are one of them. I mean, I consider myself an old gunslinger. I was an APRO field investigator back in the 70s, but you've been at this for well over a decade yourself. I'm kind of curious, what kept you in the background for that period of time? When you were actually studying this stuff, obviously it was probably your career as a lieutenant in the police force and those kinds of issues. But why did you decide to come out public at this point?
Well, interestingly enough, I'll tell you, Michael, I had lots of great UFO discussions with my coworkers at the police department. In fact, there's a sergeant who's still there, I won't name, but me and him used to really get into it. And I mean, he's the one who got me into Coast to Coast AM because he listened to it. We were all on night shift. He would religiously listen to it. So there's more people out there than you think. But for me in particular, I think you've probably heard kind of the broad colloquial term, the invisible college, so to speak, which really doesn't define anything one particular, but references people who are seriously involved in the topic, but try to stay out of the fray or the mess that's involved in it. for me, especially coming from a psychology background, and it was more advantageous to be unknown. It was more advantageous to lurk in the background because it allowed you it reduced the potential for bias of what was going on. You were allowed to be creative in your own efforts, look at the archived data of well-published books or studies that were out there, but maybe not get into the mess that goes along with it. And I'm sure both of you understand kind of what I'm getting at with the mess that can kind of go along with it. And so it was easy that it was never ridicule factor. It was just to reduce there being bias in my own kind of research and views into what I was looking at. And because for me, like I said, coming from a cognitive background, I'm really looking at this phenomenon as potentially, and I still stay by this, is that my belief in what I understand of how the brain works and perception works is that I have to consider that what we are seeing is real. I just want to make sure I tell about that because they hear, oh, he's a psychologist, he can tell us everybody's crazy and they're hallucinating. No, I'm not. I'm saying it's real. I'm not certain it's really what we think it is when we see it. And that's just, that just relates to the kind of barriers that we face through a material brain and how we process information. If we don't have language to define it, if we don't have a common reference point to go through with it, well, we will not perceive it. The best example of that is most people would probably be blown away to know that there's very good empirical evidence to suggest that 2,000 years ago, human beings did not see the color blue, didn't see it, couldn't perceive it because they had no language to define it. And so this has been shown in some really good studies that there's no blue references in any of the text that we have from 2,000 years ago. And so we didn't have a language for it. We didn't understand it. The sky could have been green, or in Homer's Odyssey, the seas were described as wine. And they had been a red. He didn't say if it was white or red wine. Probably depending on how much white or red wine he was drinking. But I realize there's a lot of stimuli that go around us that we don't perceive. And some really groundbreaking stuff in terms of the psychedelic studies with LSD and some of this stuff is really starting to demonstrate, and we're gaining a better understanding of how our brains perceive stimuli around us in our environment. And so in the case of LSD, it just opens up the gatekeeper in our brain that kicks out all the stuff that it says, no, okay, that's the way that we have nothing to relate in our environment to that. It opens that up, and suddenly you are able to pick up on these stimuli. Doesn't mean what you're seeing is what you're actually seeing. It just means there's something in that environment that is a stimuli, a visual stimuli, and you're trying to process it. So for me, staying out of it, because we're all human and we're all susceptible to our own biases, and we find people we like. We find people we enjoy, and so we can be influenced by their own biases. But I have kind of stepped out, just in this year, because I felt like I was ready, and I had things I wanted to share, and hopefully maybe help reduce some of the negativity that's involved in the field. Maybe add to the several years of traveling around and talking to people about very highly polarized topics. Civil rights, racism, gender bias, and you're sitting down with people and trying to work out these issues, you think, well, come on, man. Can the UFO community really cannot possibly be more difficult than those issues? Because at the end of the day, we're all on the same goal, right? I mean, shouldn't we? So that is a great part of why. But that was a long answer to your question, which is why did I hide in the shadows? Because if you're interested in doing serious research, sometimes it's just easier.
Yeah, I really like how you covered that topic, and I wanted to bring up something in combination with something else, and wanted to read a quote. And that is given your background regarding policing, which you have covered an awful lot of what I'm about to talk about here, but then I still want you to touch on some of it that you haven't, and that is your work on civil rights and mitigating very polarized social issues, and the thoughts that you've already covered here in the UFO community. I wanted to read a quote that you said, and that is, "In truth, the real conflict between good and evil doesn't exist in the space between the prosecution and defense table of a courtroom. No, whether we realize it or not, the real battles between light and darkness rages within us all." Can you please touch on why you said that?
Sure. Yeah, then that's a great, well, thank you. I'm impressed that you've read my blog and website from the other side of stuff I do. And indeed, that came from an article where I kind of shared everybody when I retired from policing and went to work for a private law firm. And, policing is a very close-knit, community. It's called a brotherhood for a reason. And so initially I was, people see he's gone to the dark side, you're working for the other team. I will say quickly, I was amused by that because amongst my mixed bag of multi-potentialite interest, I also happen to be a scholar of Hebrew semantics and ancient Hebrew culture. I'm fluent in Hebrew, both biblical, paleo, and modern. And I always thought it was funny to say to go to the dark side when I went to here, because in Hebrew, Satan, or Satan, as people would most refer to it, it means prosecutor, not defense person. From an ideological perspective of Christianity, Jesus would be your defense attorney. Satan would be your prosecutor. And so I always got a kick out of that. And really that quote stemmed from an article I had written just on that topic about going to the dark side and saying there's no such thing. Is that I spent years policing the streets where I saw things. I have seen abject poverty, people who are in desperate situations. I saw things that you have defined understanding as to how they happen, why did they happen. And I saw things that were miraculous that shouldn't have happened. And I have told people I got into policing when I was 21 years old, only because two of my friends who I had gone to high school with were murdered at just 21 years old, senselessly, innocent victims of a crime. They were killed right here in Savannah. And that before that, I wanted to be an astronomer or a cognitive researcher. I just wanted to solve mysteries, although I tell people jokingly that my first cosmology class, I realized I signed up for maybe my career as an astronomer wasn't going to work out, because though on the syllabus, when they said I need to buy wigs and some hair clippers and stuff, I thought it was strange. but not till the first day did I realize I was in cosmetology. I realized I was wrong. But in truth, that event made me want to go into law enforcement. But I got into it when I was 21. I turned 21 at the police academy. And, so while most 21-year-olds are, taking Jell-O shots at the bar, I was in the police academy. And I got into that job looking for bad guys. And then almost 16 years later, ironically enough, and I never timed that out, the last day that I retired was the exact same day that my two friends, Thomas O'Hare and Kenny Carlton, were murdered 16 years prior. It was the last day I was policing. And I say I got out and I never found any bad guys. I found people who made good choices and people who made bad choices, but we are capable of both. And that quote about the conflict between us all is just that, is that we are always capable of very great things or very bad things. But that choice is up to us. And even people who make mistakes and do bad things, they're still capable of doing great things. And I think it was very easy for us to become closed-minded off and form opinions of people. But I do always urge people to consider, even those they don't like, or maybe they don't like because of something they've done. And I believe in that article I ended that by those who are familiar with Star Wars is asking the philosophical question, was Darth Vader a bad guy? Yeah. Most people would say, yeah, I mean, he killed me, he did all these bad things and killed people. this is true, but if those familiar with the film will know that Darth Vader's last act was to save his son's life, sacrifice his own, and de facto save the Star Wars galaxy. And so that is his final act. Was Darth Vader a good guy or a bad guy? And meaning we're all capable of doing something good or great. And so a lot of the tearing down that we do to others, we should be focused on ourselves, that inner fight of ourselves, of not wanting to tear others down, but bring others up, because we're bringing ourselves up. Because we feel the need to tear others down, that probably means there's something in us that we're not happy with, and we want to tear somebody down with. So figure that out. And I've always been very, very big on saying, look in the mirror first. You know, people always, when I said, don't blame the media, don't blame whoever, look at yourself and say, what have I done to help or hurt any situation? People say, yeah, but the media does this, the media is biased. Maybe they are. You know what? Sure.
I'm glad that you brought that up, by the way. I did read that article, which is, it's long, but it's very, very good. And the Darth Vader and then the Satan reference that you made, if everybody wants to read that, what I want them to do is go to Tim McMillan's site, and you can basically go to lttimmcmillan.com, and you will see the post he did called To the Dark Side. It's a great article. It's long, but once you start reading it, you'll lose track of time. And it's very interesting, the perspective that he has, his philosophical perspective regarding Darth Vader, whether he was really a bad guy or not. I did want to read a little part of it, and that is, for the overwhelming majority, Tim said on his website regarding this wonderful article, Darth Vader was the dark side. His son Luke personified the light. Yet at the very end, if it hadn't been for Darth Vader's darkness, Luke's light would have been extinguished. Two opposing forces married in a complex web of necessity. Without one or the other, righteousness might not have ever been the prevailing outcome. And then he goes on to finish by saying, from a philosophical perspective, this makes me wonder, was Darth Vader actually a bad guy? I won't read the ending, but I think that what you had to say was absolutely fantastic, and I'm really glad that you covered that.
Well, thank you. I'm really impressed, and I appreciate you reading that, because that side, my website, it touches on, and that is the tone of just about everything that I talk about. I never try to say this is what you need to think, this is what's right or wrong. You know, one point, I always have, I am open to listening to anything anyone has to say, and in fact, I learn more when I listen from people who I don't agree with initially, because I learn more from it. The only thing that I think, this is just me as a human being, that I can't really, we're not going to agree to disagree, is that if you don't believe that all people are created equal and should enjoy the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, all people, regardless of what you think of their religious background, their cultural heritage, anything, if you do not believe that all people, indeed should be afforded the right to equality, well, we're probably not going to get along. I mean, we're just not going to agree to disagree with that one. How about that? But as long as we can agree that all people deserve those equal opportunities and equal respect, that we are all equal on this world, and then we can just about disagree about anything else. And frankly, I get more out of the disagreements. I think people shy away from wanting to avoid, and this goes to the UFO community, shying away from topics that they think conflict with their ideas of what something is or isn't. And that's very limiting. You're very limiting yourself, and you may be wrong.
Well, Tim, you're touching on some great subjects here as far as equality and, true research and good and evil and stuff. And I know you have kind of an opinion as well about the role, the good role, the most amazing role that we are now seeing with women in ufology, as far as Chant Hannah is a perfect example of that, coming forth and taking the reins in research and getting into the details of the truth. So you might want to address that.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to. And in fact, I'll tip of the hat that is a topic that I am working on for a longer, discussion, a longer blog post, longer something. I don't know how it's going to turn on it, but really reaching out and speaking to a lot of different women who have been involved in the entire UFO field, hearing their stories and getting those stories out there, because at least in the instances that I have been involved in and people who I've talked to, like Chant and many others who are women in this field, I've heard some stories that are horror stories, in my opinion, in terms of the amount of respect that they have received in their own opinions or their ability to really be active participants in this field. That bothers me, and it should bother everyone, because, and I stand by this statement, if we as human beings cannot respect each other and respect that we all can bring something to the table, regardless of what our race, creed, religion, or gender is, into this subject, I'm very sorry. I know people want, quote unquote, disclosure, but you are not ready. You're not ready to try to understand intelligence, that whether it is from another planet or just a sentient intelligence that is vastly inhuman. You're not ready if you can't understand and respect people who are different from you and give them an equal opportunity for it. And frankly, it's absolutely limiting. It's an unfortunate thing. And I go past ufology. That is a problem that I have seen and many of my friends been speaking to in terms of the sciences in general, and especially astronomy is the kind of thing. I mean, that was back when I wanted to be an astronomist, that was the thing. If you were a woman astronomer, if you're a woman trying to get an astronomy degree, that's just silly, because you're never going to really get a job. You're never going to get, that's ridiculous. Because if we're talking about making insights, breakthroughs, and bettering this entire world, I really don't care who it is. The gender is irrelevant. And so everybody brings a different perspective. Do I believe there's biological differences in men and women? Sure. And in fact, that's exactly why you include such a diverse broad of people and give them respect to hear these things. And so I haven't fully got committed into it, but that is something I'm working on. And I hope it doesn't, well, actually, I don't care if it ruffles any feathers, because it needs to be said. The only reason I haven't worked on it harder is I truly debated, well, do I, as a guy, am I supposed to be the one standing up for women here? But I finally settled on the side that, you know what, yeah, as another guy, I at least have no problems looking other guys in space and saying, that's BS, guys. Like if getting to the truth is the ultimate goal, everybody should have a voice at this table, and no one should feel disrespected, and no one should feel like their inclusion in this field is related to their sexuality or anything of that nature. And I mean, I've heard some really bad stories, and I'm not going to get into those.
Right.
But that's disappointing.
It is, and I'm glad you talked about that. I just wanted to say that I'm glad that people such as yourself are able to transcend those kind of stereotypes and negative stereotypes, that is, and challenges that women do face in ufology, and help to defend us in that respect. So thank you for doing that. The more, the better, regarding supporters for ourselves in ufology. I did do something because I was very frustrated regarding the kind of challenge you're talking about. That is, I started the Global Female Researchers List of women to be honored, rather females, because there could also be girls who are involved in the research of ufology and other phenomena. So I called it the Global Female Researchers List for that reason. And there's probably maybe 300 or 400 females on that list now from all over the world, who all speak different languages, are all beautiful in their own way and have all worked very, very hard, blood, sweat, and tears regarding the topic of ufology and other phenomena. And they are absolutely thrilled to finally get the public credit that they want and desire, to also let everyone know that women are just as equal as men are in this area that we all love to research. I did want to end the show with a really wonderful quote by Dr. Anna Freud, the sixth and youngest child of Sigmund Freud. And she said, how wonderful it is that nobody needs to wait even a single moment before starting to improve the world. There are people out there right now, unfortunately, sometimes women, who feel that women need to be treated as second-class citizens. I haven't run into very many of those women, but people around the world that are under the impression that women should not be as equal to men, I would like to say this. If you finally do come to the conclusion that women should be treated as equal as men, which I certainly hope you do, just know it only takes 1 second to change your mind and to change the world in that respect. And Tim, I would love to just have you on the show again. You've been such a gracious and wonderful guest, so generous with your time. It's been extremely enlightening to have you on the show. And I want to thank you for having been on the show with us today.
No, thank you very much. And any time I would be more than glad to. This is it's a good topic, and it's an interesting topic. I'd like to get it out there and shed away any of those old barriers, but without being disrespectful as well. I think, Michael, you called yourself one of the old guns, maybe, and you're equally as important in everything. So I think that in terms of the young guns, we should never bowl over. The whole point is bringing everybody into the mix.
I think you're right. I think everybody, regardless of the categorization of them, should all be equally respected. And I don't know if anybody knows this, but Michael W. Hall, also known as a paranormal lawyer, who has a wonderful UFOI team, and they investigate things on a regular, has done everything within his power to help enlighten the world regarding the topics you and I love to research. And I really want to appeal to everyone to look up his name and find out more about what he does, as well as yourself. I did have one question that might be a little challenging for you, Tim, and that is there a way that you can, with brevity, somehow just say, what is the takeaway for you regarding ufology in general? Is there maybe one or two things you can say, in a broad way, what you've learned regarding this topic and the community surrounding it?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I don't know if I can in one or two ways, because I think it's reckless to ever say that we know anything for certain. And maybe that's the most important thing is accepting that we don't know anything for certain. And more importantly, to be open to listening to all avenues objectively. And I say that because when I say listening to everybody's perspective doesn't mean that if you hear something that you're just like, wow, now this, I just don't think, this person maybe needs mental health help here. You don't have to believe everything. Believing isn't the part, but listening to everything. And I wholeheartedly put that out there, because one thing that needs to be accepted, I would say, this is my personal opinion, looking on it from the outside in, is that we need to understand that right now we're in a position where there is no body of authority in ufology, and people need to accept that. And I don't mean that as a negative thing. I mean that it's very difficult to say anyone is an expert, and one of the hardest things for anyone to accept is that they can be wrong. And so oftentimes we fight amongst ourselves just because we think others think that we're incompetent because of our own views. But there's a big difference between ignorance and incompetence. We're all ignorant. We all there's things we don't learn about. And so it's that we approach things without ever making people feel like they're incompetent, because that's not true. People aren't incompetent. We all can be ignorant, and there's a lot of joy. I encourage and seek out to be proven wrong daily, because that's how I learn. And so I'm always open to that. And so do I have a broad strokes tell you? What have I learned? Sure, I've learned that I'm still ignorant on the subject. We still don't know for sure. I can't tell you whatsoever, and I try to really hard reject anybody becoming too locked into any one theory. Rather, let's bring in everybody, science, philosophy, theology, and it all, until we figure out what domain this really fits in and go from there.
I would like to invite everybody to go to Tim's website. It's very robust with a lot of information that is worthy read, and it's www.lttimmcmillan.com. So that's www.lttimmcmillan.com. Thank you, Tim, for being on the show with us today.
No, thank you very much, Michael and Chant. It was a pleasure talking to you guys.
And that is the Chant Hannah Show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Tim McMillan, and thank you, Chant.